The market is super competitive. So my advice would be when it's this competitive, I think there's a lot of pressure to be um, competent at most parts of production. So that includes hard surface. If you're a creature artist, you should know humans. Um, it's just important these days. It's highly competitive. And those people who do know how to do everything are going to get preference. So I would say be critical of your resume. Um, the cliff notes for your portfolio are, I think, keep it short and sweet. You don't want to waste a recruiter's time with kind of repetitive work. I have a lot of dinosaurs on my portfolio. I don't need to show every single dinosaur on the front page of it. You know, so it's I think make sure that you have a variety of things that advertise your skills. Look for gaps. Yeah, when in doubt, that is my go-to brush. If I can't figure out wrinkles, I'll use it. I will say it generates happy accidents. So if I don't know how I want the wrinkles to flow, sometimes I'll just kind of
Uh-huh.
play with that brush, and I'll find a good flow that I like, and then I can build on that with the other brushes. Yeah, right. When you're making art, you want to do it consciously. Um, the worst thing that can happen to you is when you're successful without knowing why in art, I think. So, it's people think a lot about their failures, but think about your successes too. Would be the other piece of advice I have is think about why it went well, what do you like about it, and how to repeat that on the next one are like really important things I think for artists to think about.
Mm. Suffering from success.
Sometimes you just have natural kind of understanding of artistic principles. I'm
Yeah.
self-taught. I didn't go to art school. It wasn't until I had an art director who actually, was trained that I
Mhm.
realized how.
Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the podcast series X, Y, and Z, where I interview some of the most amazing artists and 3D artists also. So, my today's guest is a very special person, very special artist. He is a polio artist and video game artist, 3D character artist, sorry. He has been working on bringing back numerous models for the game The Isle, for the game Sorian, and now for Towers of Agasba. And also, he has done some work for scientific papers, the art side of them. Uh, Let me introduce to you Jacob
But it's Bardsey. Everybody gets it wrong.
Bardsey. Okay, sorry. Welcome.
It's Dutch. I think it's Dutch. But thank you. I'm happy to be here.
Yeah, of course. Nice to have you here. So, I'll start with a question that's uh, I've been really interested about your answer. So, when you create a dinosaur, right? What are the top, like, very important things when you are sculpting? Like, what to look for when you're in the sculpting phase?
Oh, well, there's a lot of ways to answer that. I think the main thing is just having a good sort of foundational knowledge. I found that I learned kind of musculature and how to pinpoint like bony landmarks and the sort of hallmarks of like where certain muscles attach pretty early on. Thanks to I took a class with David Krentz who kind of went over a lot of that. Scott Hartman happened to be guest starring in that class, so
Yes,
it
yes.
was a good
Mm-hmm.
good company to learn from. Um, but yeah, I think just really having like sort of good foundational knowledge of anatomy, knowing where muscles attach, like what to look for when you're looking at the skeleton, are like the really big ones. Once you have that, you can kind of adapt almost any, dinosaur skeleton, even like ones that feel like they have very out there anatomy. Like if you really understand anatomy, you can do, you can adapt musculature from a T-Rex to an Ankylosaurus. Like the same muscle groups are there, the same landmarks are there. There's obviously a lot of differences in how how those two look.
Yes, yes.
But yeah, I think having a good understanding of comparative anatomy is really 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 big. Um, I think the other thing that people need to do, at least I find I need to do, is abandon sort of preconceived notions pretty early on about what it might look like. I tend to treat like serious paleo reconstruction like a kind of journey of discovery.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and so I have like ideas about how I want it to look, or like a character I want it to have, or a vibe I want it to give off early on. And sometimes, when I start building the creature and the taking in the skeletal reference and the musculature, it'll pan out the way I expect it to, and oftentimes it does not. It looks completely different from the vibe that I intended for. So I think it's really important to be open that your ideas, which are largely media fueled, can be wrong, and that you should be pulling from nature and also the direct skeletal and musculature reference.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I love how you said that you can, once you understand the anatomy of dinosaurs, you can as well create a T-Rex and then Ankylosaurus, which the anatomy is very, very different when you look at it. But at the
Yeah,
end of the day, like the muscles are there, but slightly different shapes and so on. Yeah,
yeah,
these could be even called nuances if you understand some basic
yep,
things. Yeah.
for sure.
And how often do you use like the skeletal reconstructions? How does your workflow look like?
Well, I'll always have them in the background. The important thing, this is over time, what you kind of learn is that for a lot of creatures, for a lot of dinosaurs, the skeletons are very incomplete. So I think it's important to kind of know what we have, especially if it's something you're unsure of. So I'll look for the Scott Hartman, skeletal illustrations, the GSP skeletal illustrations. But then I'll also try to kind of look at the Wikipedia page and see what have we actually discovered from this thing, and how do we draw these sort of larger ideas about how they look. Because oftentimes it'll be a close relative, or something like that, and there might be a little room to play if you want to mess with proportions a little bit or do something a little bit different.
Right. Yeah. Exactly. Yeah. It's. I feel like for me, it's uh, kind of trying to balance what what we know for sure, and then taking some artistic liberty
Yeah.
and sculpting. Right. Yeah. That's not very simple, especially if you're starting out to understand where you can kind of play around with shapes, and then where it's like a zone where you shouldn't do that.
Yeah, you need to get comfortable with various animals. I noticed it when I started doing pterosaurs. Is I didn't know a lot about pterosaurs, so finding where the gray area was to explore was really difficult for me. I kind of want, when you start off, I think you really want like marching orders,
Hmm.
and the unfortunate
Yes.
thing about paleontology is there's no real confirmed answers on anything. You talk to enough paleontologists and you really want them to give you like definitive, yes, it looked like this. Yes, this is what's going on here. And you can be kind of disappointed when they start telling you, yeah, I'm not sure. Like we don't really know. So yeah, it's finding, I think, getting comfortable in the uncertainty, but also finding the areas that we do know, and then trying to explore in the boundaries of what we don't.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. That's true. That's true. Yeah, but you know, achieving um, a decent amount of skill, or even a lot of amount of skill, it takes a lot of practice. And in order to practice a lot, you need to have discipline. So, do you have any advice for an artist to stay disciplined and stay practicing, even though you know everyone has those days when you just don't feel like doing the work that you should do?
Yeah, well, my answer is kind of that it depends on the person, right? Everybody's kind of wired differently. So I think my broad advice on that would be, introspect, get to know yourself. What motivates you, what demotivates you, where do you kind of lose interest? Find out why you're not finishing projects, or why you're not even starting them. And then I always kind of live by the motto of like, don't set yourself up to fail, right? If you have too many temptations around you, remove them. If the environment isn't conducive to you being creative, don't work in that environment. Try to find another place to work in. And I kind of a big believer in incentivizing myself. If there's something I want to do that isn't productive, I try to make myself earn it. So achieve realistic milestones and then go play a video game for an hour or two. Don't start with the video game though and then go, oh, I'll work later, because you'll play all day.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
So that's my broad advice. Is I think it really, I think I know myself pretty well. That's why I've been able to stay disciplined. Is that I know how I get distracted, so I try to remove the opportunity for me to get distracted.
Yeah, so important part is gonna be yeah, try to be more conscious about your actions. So yeah,
Yeah,
get to know yourself better. Yeah, that's
yeah.
that's a great advice. It's very broad, but at the same time, uh, it's free of the bullshit that sometimes people try to sell you.
Well, that's the best. Yeah, it's the best I could do. It's so people want like a roadmap, right, to being disciplined, and the truth is, I think it looks different for a number of different people. I know people who don't do anything until like 6 p.m. and they're like incredibly disciplined at that point onward, but it's like the early part of the day they're not doing anything. So they found something that works for them, and I think that's the thing. Is hopefully that resonates with people, but I think really understanding when you do the best is stuff that you should try to kind of the conditions you should create more often, I guess I should
Yes.
say.
Yeah, yeah, that's great. So yeah, along your way, everyone runs into some issues and hardships. So in terms of creating dinos and creatures, what would you say was for you? What was the thing that caused you most trouble, and how did you manage to overcome it?
It's funny. I was thinking about this question. And I don't honestly remember, and this isn't not to say I never had trouble, because I had plenty of trouble. It's just that I don't remember any individual instance of like this specific thing bothered me. It was very contextual. Just certain projects, there was something about it that bugged me, or that I couldn't get right, or I couldn't get to a point that satisfied me. Whether it was like the larger shapes, the textural sort of stuff. Just I think everybody has those projects where it's just not clicking. I found for me lately, uh, the most important thing is to exercise patience, and that if something's not turning out, usually time will remedy it. Now there is an Overton window, like too much time can just be
Yes.
counterproductive. You can be
Mm-hmm.
tweaking forever and you'll never be satisfied. And in a professional sphere, you can't work on something forever until you're satisfied, right? But I do think bowling forward and getting impatient uh, didn't help me, so there was sometimes I just had to kind of learn that, if like the hands are bothering me. Like I used to struggle with hands, I suppose, a little bit. I
Mm-hmm.
think everybody does at a certain point because they're so
Yes.
intricate and small. Um, Part of the problem was I had this expectation, well, I'm going to finish the whole base model in like 3 hours and then move on, to medium frequency details. And I realized, well, maybe just take another hour just to focus on the hands. And the more you do that, the more you kind of fixate on individual things, the faster you get at those things. Now I can do hands pretty quickly because I'm really comfortable with them. But that would be I think is building up that like base level of comfort with everything, I think is like what takes the longest. And then the other one is literally just starting the project. I think can be really in any creative endeavor. If you're writing a book, it's hard to just like to write the first page is the hardest part. So yeah, to move past that, I would just recommend again, I think putting yourself in an environment where you can start it and then understanding, I think going in that starting it will be the most difficult aspect. Once you start, you can kind of flow and you get moving, but the starting it's the hard part.
Yeah, 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 yeah. That's true. And your answer for this question connects to the previous one, like you said. But in order to, stay disciplined. You need to figure out how you work, and it takes some, retrospection and introspection.
Yeah.
And if you do that, in the process of that, you can tell which are your weak links and which weak points, and you can work on them. Yeah, that's great. Yeah, because if you don't think about it, well, how can you tell what's your weak point?
Yeah. Right. When you're making art, you want to do it consciously.
Mm-hmm.
The worst thing that can happen to you is when you're successful without knowing why in art, I think. So, it's people think a lot about their failures, but think about your successes too. Would be the other piece of advice I have is think about why it went well, what do you like about it, and how to repeat that on the next one are like really important things I think for artists to think about.
Suffering from success.
Sometimes you just have natural kind of understanding of artistic principles. I'm
Yeah.
self-taught. I didn't go to art school. It wasn't until I had an art director who actually, was trained that I realized how sort of consciously you can create art, and how you can think about it on a deeper level. And sometimes if you're really good, a lot of the things that you're doing happen to align with the stuff you learn in art school. But it's good to know why those things are important. You know what I mean?
Yeah, that's true. That's very true. Yes, it's better to understand than just, I don't know, like when I used to draw as a kid, it was
Yeah.
obviously dinosaurs, and I wouldn't
Yep.
think too much about the structure, the bony landmarks, right? It was just copying what's in front of me. But
Yeah.
when you understand the topic, you can replicate it, what you said, like with the T-Rex and Ankylosaurus. If you understand the principles, you can, slap the anatomy on a different dinosaur, and then it's still going to make sense. Yeah. So understanding, that's a
Some
key
people are
big
great
point.
like
Mhm.
instinctual artists.
Mhm.
And I think it's important to kind of try to learn to convert instinct into knowledge at a certain point down the road.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. Yeah. So you said you've been working under an art director. So you had some people that had influence over your art journey. So who would you say uh, were the people that had the biggest influence on your growth?
Well, first of all, the one who started it all for me, I was messing around in 3D art,
Mm-hmm.
since middle school,
Oh.
with Blender. But the first serious class I took was David Krentz's class on dinosaur sculpting.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and like I mentioned before, with Scott Hartman involved as well.
Mm-hmm.
And that gave me a lot of the foundational kind of knowledge that I have for specifically dinosaur creation.
Mm-hmm.
As well as I'd sculpted in ZBrush a little bit, but it kind of gave me my first like look at what a workflow might be for an actual professional level character. So that was a David Krentz I owe a lot to. It's so funny because he messages me now asking for technical advice quite often. So it's
Roles
come
have
full circle.
reversed.
Yeah, it's come full circle. But yeah, David Krantz. I learned a lot working with RJ Palmer on Saurian.
Mm-hmm.
I think we talk about being cognizant of your decisions and being thoughtful about how you reconstruct dinosaurs. I think he does a great job of incorporating. He just has a vocabulary of
Mm-hmm.
knowledge about wildlife and current living species and how to apply them to dinosaur reconstruction.
Mm-hmm.
So he definitely changed a lot about how I think about paleo art. And yeah, the art director I worked with on Towers, Kang Lee, who's a seasoned sort of VFX and video game concept artist. Uh, that was the first time I ever worked with like real serious art direction on a project, and I learned an incredible amount from that project.
Mm. Yeah. I mean, I envy you for working with RJ Palmer. Yeah, I've seen his I think concept art for the T-Rex for Saurian. I mean, uh, the reconstruction still holds up, and it's one of the best ones. So Yeah.
Yeah, I think that whole team kind of, not to toot our own horn, really reinvented the sort of popular image of what T-Rex looked like.
Yeah, that's
So,
true. Yeah. Yeah, and here's the thing, like sometimes even the depictions of what dinosaurs would have really looked like, they sometimes even look better than media the broad media images, like say of T-Rex, right? Like
yeah.
it looks pretty terrifying with the lips. And I don't know if you've heard the sound reconstruction of T-Rex. I think there was some guy on YouTube that made it. Yeah, the sounds are pretty haunting, honestly.
Yeah, I've seen some of those.
Yeah. So you've been working in 3D for a while now. Mm. So what would you say was the craziest story that happened during your
Um, so
work?
a lot of it's NDA. I don't know how much I could share.
Uh,
I do have one. So the one I thought of, which I'm pretty sure I could talk about, is I got to appear in a documentary called Dinosaur Cold Case, which is was a really fun opportunity, but it was one of the weirder working experiences I've ever had. They wanted me to create a Boreal pelta. The whole point of the documentary was kind of it's a cold case. It's how did this dinosaur die? And if you don't know the Boreal pelta fossil, it's really cool. It basically just looks like a chunk of dinosaur converted into rock. I mean, the whole thing is preserved beautifully. Um, so I had a lot of fun creating that reconstruction. My segment was about, they were kind of, the storyline is they're kind of theorizing how the dinosaur died, and so one of the obvious ones is maybe something ate it, right? And so they tried to see how it would deal with predators, and I had to animate a walk cycle and a run cycle. And the end point of the story is that it
mhm.
can't run very fast, so it wouldn't be outrunning predators.
Uh-huh.
uh, and so I made the animation. They flew me out to LA, and I got to film with Mike Habib, and I think the producer and the camera guy, and we were there for maybe about an hour. It was such a weird experience. I flew in that night. Next day, drove in to University of Southern California. Filmed for about an hour. We had like a whole. Me and Mike could be a whole back and forth. He was like, "This is the animation," and he's like, "So this is how fast you can get it to move." And I was like, "Yeah, that's about as fast as it can go." And and in the documentary, I must have been awful because they used nothing.
Oh.
They sit down, and Mike Vibso was like, "So this is the animation you have to show us," and I go,
Mhm.
"Yep," and it cuts out right there.
May have moved 110 million years ago.
So I see you've matched the stride length to the trackways.
Yes.
And then that's it. That's all. That's all I had. That was my
Oh.
2 seconds of fame. So it was pretty good. My friends made it into a GIF, so they torture me with it now.
Yeah, that's a bit unfortunate, but yeah, but working on a
Yeah.
documentary is still a flex, honestly.
My only documentary gig. I wish I got to do more. But
So yeah, we talked a bit about discipline, and the mindset and so on. So I'll come back to it a bit with a question. Mm, what would you say was your biggest time waster, uh, and how did you find yourself falling into it?
well, I think the early stuff people do that I probably shared was, creating the model from scratch every time. Um, I think especially when you get ready for production ready workflows, you want to reuse as much as you can. If you're sculpting the same thing over and over again, whether it's like a textural detail or just like, if you make a theropod once and then you make a theropod again, that's wasted time. Start working on base meshes or utilizing base meshes or creating stamps, like things that'll speed your workflow along. It'll help you so much. You might think it will homogenize your work a little bit, but you don't, you're the artist. You don't need to let it do that. But there's no sense in sculpting the same thing over and over and over again. So that's certainly one. When you start doing that, you will really unlock your time because you'll realize even things that don't take very long still take time, right? And it's important to kind of make sure that you're maximizing your time expenditure, especially if you don't want to do stuff. I don't want to sculpt the base every time. It's annoying. If I have a good enough base mesh, I can just sort of warp it to whatever new project I have, and it'll serve my purposes just fine. And I've saved hours. Um, but so it'd be that, and I think it would be uh, getting way, 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 way too cerebral about textural detail. I've kind of pivoted away from when I started. The texture is how you make it look real, right? That's how I think what a lot of people believe, and it's largely true. But in my experience, if you don't have great foundational forms, the texture is kind of meaningless. It can be just noise. So I almost focus way more now on the broader forms, which take less time to sculpt, but I spend a bit more time on them. And the texture isn't an afterthought, but it's not my be all end all anymore. And I think you can spend a lot of time on texture, uh, repeating scale shapes and stuff like that quite often.
Yeah, that's very true. I mean, I think I have this like anecdote. Like, imagine this might be okay. Let's say it. Imagine putting flowers on shit. It's still gonna be shit, right?
Right.
So what's the point making these little details if the main shapes, the base is not
Yeah.
good enough? Hmm? Yeah, that's a very good point. But yeah, I would like to come back to your previous answer for the time wasters, like doing the base meshes, and I think that's a very good advice. But what would you say if someone is a beginner? Do you think creating base meshes and then
Yeah.
working
I
from
mean,
them, is it a
the
good
big thing
idea?
there is
Hmm.
repeated work, right? So if you've never done it before, it's not repeated work. Everybody should learn to sculpt something. Like if you're working on human anatomy, you should learn to sculpt the human from scratch, from a sphere. You will have a way more intimate knowledge of it, but you don't need to do that every time, right? You can do that once or twice, and then maybe even isolate, specific anatomy exercises. But if it's something you kind of learn the more you start learning about other professional artists. Like if the Naughty Dog artists or people working at Sony Santa Monica are creating the base mesh from scratch every single time they need to make a human character, it's going to take a lot longer. They,
Yeah,
they don't do that. They work from base meshes because it just saves them a ton of time.
yeah, that's true.
So
That's true. Yeah, I
yeah,
mean
but
it's yeah. Go ahead.
I was saying, if you're a beginner, absolutely, you need to learn how to create all of that from scratch. And then once you're comfortable with that, you don't need to do that anymore. You can save yourself a headache.
Yeah. I just wanted to clarify it because I know that some people watching this might take it.
Sure.
Yeah, like create base meshes. Although you're not a professional when it comes to doing the fundamentals.
Yeah.
Um,
I will say,
mhm,
making a base mesh
mhm.
is a great exercise.
Oh,
Uh,
mhm.
just using one, like someone else made, maybe not, but when I started getting into human anatomy, my goal was just to make a base mesh. I was like, I'll just make a male, like kind of generic character. And that's just my project. It's just to make something that I can use on other projects. And I wound up having to redo that one several times, but it is just something I think that yeah, it can help you out. Just making the base mesh itself can help you do that.
Yeah, I agree. um, yeah, I have a request for you. If you could
All right.
show off one of your recent models, preferably a dinosaur, if you have one, obviously for
um,
obvious reasons.
yeah. So I picked. Okay, I had a few options, and none of them are very recent, unfortunately, because
Oh,
everything is
that's
NDA.
yeah, that's fine. That's fine.
That's the other thing I've had to learn is the social media goes quiet when you start working professionally. because everything you do is for somebody else. But I do have the Carnotaurus I made for Creative Beast Studio for their
Mhm.
toy line.
Oh, that's nice.
Thank you.
Yes. So, could you tell us how does your sculpting workflow look like? Like right from the beginning, did you start from a base mesh for the Carno,
Yeah, I start
or?
from a base mesh, and the thing is funnily enough, I've cheated especially on this one. There is a few animals that I have been hired to make more than anything else in my career, and it's Carnotaurus and T-Rex and some sort of Jurassic Park raptor. Those two, I probably made you know at least half a dozen models of each, if not more. Um, so I even had an older Carnotaurus model to start from. I wanted it to look different for the toy line, so I smoothed it all over and resculpted a lot of it. But it is starting from a base mesh. Um, and as far as the workflow goes, just kind of finding these ones are really hard for me when I have to repeat it because I don't want to give somebody just the same model that I've already done. I'd really like to give them something unique. So it was trying to find kind of new inspirations for it. So I was looking at, it's got these big keratinous horns. I thought maybe hornbills would be kind of an interesting take on it. And there's nothing in the impressions that we have that necessarily emit, any fleshy bits on the face and around the eyes. So I added these kind of like eye shapes around here, but basically just starting from a smooth shape, kind of building out from there. I spend a lot of time on the flow of wrinkles. Sort of, it's a messy workflow. It's not clean, and you can look at all the references you want, but things just hang differently, right, on an actual creature versus like a photo reference of a bird that has different shapes going on. So there's lots of kind of working on various areas of the wrinkle forms and then smoothing it out because I didn't like it and then doing it again. After that, I do, which you can kind of vaguely see, a kind of fine wrinkle layer. You can maybe see some of these poking through the scale shapes. I find that's really important because it breaks up the surface a little bit when you do the scales. Even this, because this is an older model, is a lot more monotonous than I like to do now. I like a lot more breakup on the surface. It looks more natural. Yeah, I think really having some good, solid foundational base work in there with the wrinkles can like help when you start doing the texturing later down the line. After that, I believe. Let's
I
see.
have one question about the
Oh, go for it.
wrinkles. Do you use a draw brush to create the big ones, or how? What tools do
Oh
you use
yeah.
for them?
Okay, so before I get into all that, yes, I use what a lot of artists use, and what I picked up from Krentz's class is it's a standard brush with a little bit of hang to it, so it's got just the slightest bit of gravity applied. And then what I've also started doing lately, I'll give you guys a demo. And I never save this brush. This is another. Don't follow. don't do what I do. Do what I say. Save this brush. I add a little bit of inflate to it with this brush modifier, and I add a smooth, usually very low, and usually you have to bump up the strength a little bit. And we'll do it on a little bit of a lower level. But the reason why is because you can blend the wrinkles in really well together. See that? So it's very nice because wrinkles basically come in Y's, X's, and Z's, right? This is what you learn when you do cloth in particular. And when you're doing it with just a standard, you get this like weird overlap right here, right? Which doesn't look very natural. So when you use smooth, you can kind of blend them in together a lot better. And you can even, carve it in as well. So yeah.
Oh, that's really nice. That's what I've been actually struggling with for a while now as well. Like in Blender, it's very similar. So yeah, there is that weird build up.
The sort of pull that happens at the very top. Yeah.
Yeah, true. And for the finer wrinkles, do you use like a mix of alpha brushes and the
Yeah,
standard brush?
sometimes I'll
Hmm.
use stamps, and then I'll use this, which again a lot of ZBrush artists will use, is this roll brush with, which alpha is this? 60. So you set it to roll in your stroke settings. And here's something people might not know. You can extend the distance of it to make the line straighter with the roll distance. If I had here, maybe you can kind of see. So this is with the roll distance set up. You can see it's very straight. If I set it to 1, see it's a lot more like tattered. And then I also play with the blur. And you can really quickly get some kind of cool, almost like elephant-like texture. Just with that. Yeah, when in doubt, that is my go-to brush. If I can't figure out wrinkles, I'll use it. I will say it generates happy accidents. So if I don't know how I want the wrinkles to flow, sometimes I'll just kind of
Uh-huh.
play with that brush, and I'll find a good flow that I like, and then I can build on that with the other brushes.
Hmm.
So yeah, that's my go-to fine wrinkle brush. All right, do we have any more questions about wrinkles, like, or I can move on to scales?
Yeah, I think that's all for the wrinkles. Yeah, if you could go for the
Sure. All
scales
right.
now. Hmm.
So this is my special workflow. Is I paint a scale mask
Uh-huh.
um, with poly paint. And the reason I do that is because when you start putting on the scales, you can just do um, mask by cavity. I got a blur on there. 1 second. And you'll get a pretty clean, you know, mask. But sometimes what people will notice, you can kind of see it in there, is the very center of the scale will get picked up by the cavity because
Hmm.
it is, it's a cavity. It's not convex.
Hmm.
Um, so when I have it by polypaint, I can do a mask by intensity. And then what I can do is modify that. So it's a very clean scale mask.
Hmm.
And I can shrink. And then you get, something like this. So you can kind of sculpt with a bit more. Let's see if I use standard. Those are more spiky now.
Hmm.
If you mess with your mask adjust, let's see, can I reset? Yep. You can do something like this. Oop, I added an extra point.
Hmm.
Apply, invert. There we go. And this will actually add a recess in at the very top. Let's see if maybe you can see it. Yeah, you can kind of see it in there. So you can get more dimension to your scale workflow, and you can work very kind of like, maybe I want these ones to be spiky and these ones to be more like this. You can kind of work contextually. So you really make the most out of your scale work. Um, and then you always have that mask to go back to. I've changed this a little bit. I'm not going to pull them up because it's a really messy workflow. But so I would do this with normally, if I was prepared, I would have brought this all up. I have a tiled scale texture, and I put it in the spotlight tool, and it will project straight down onto the model. And you can just paint it really quickly kind of over it, and you'll get like a very seamless texture application for the scales. And you can use view distance like in and out to sort of change scale size and things like that. Um, Now I do that as kind of a basement layer, and then I also have a collection of stamps that are just poly paint stamps. I haven't found a better way to do it. So right now, the way I have to do it is I actually need 2 textures per stamp. So I need an outline, which I'll apply as an alpha, and I need the stamp itself, which I'll apply in the texture channel here. And it'll be a drag brush. And then you can stamp on, I have stuff for like lips or just like general large scales, or even like, these kind of conical scales. I can have like stamps for those. So you can stamp those on top of the basement work, and it'll add a lot of variety to your scale texture really quickly, and it looks pretty nice. I wish I could show you some examples of
Mm.
some sculpts I've done, but we can't do it yet.
Oh yeah,
And
that's okay.
NDA'd. But
Mhm.
yeah, so that's my current
Mhm.
workflow.
Mhm. Do you use VDMs in your workflow?
Yeah, if I can. I sculpt maybe about a dozen VDMs per project. And again, it's born from the similar kind of habit of if you find yourself sculpting a detail once or twice, don't do it a third time. It'll just take you a long time to do it. So make a VDM. Typically, on every project, I will just have like a plane, open in my Z tools, and that's my VDM kind of canvas, and I'll just sculpt on the plane, and um, I'll do it for wrinkles, I'll do it for scales, I'll do it for some anatomical features sometimes, like ears or noses. But yeah, I think they're very helpful. It's very nice. It's magic technology. I like doing it.
Yeah, yeah, that's true. And I do have one more question about the scales. How much do you do? How much of scales do you do by hand?
Nowadays, I try to be very selective. So a lot of the face will be by hand. But the body, I try not to do by hand, unless there's like a very specific area that I want to have like a really particular kind of scale flow. Um, yeah, with dinosaurs, the scales are so small. I really, when I first started out, I thought it'd be like a huge mark of like prestige that I did every scale individually. And now I see people do that, even like sketching. Some people like sketch each scale individually, and it's like
Mhm.
you spent a lot of time on that. You didn't have to do that. There was better ways
Mm.
for you.
Yeah,
So yeah, I would not recommend people do. If you're doing an accurate dinosaur, I would not recommend you do each scale individually. It's a pain.
yeah, yeah. That's true. I think everyone goes through this, like, especially the first like dinosaur or reptile model. It's
Yeah,
like thinking I have to do every single scale by hand.
yeah.
But
Don't do that.
it
You're
takes
wasting your time.
way, way, way too much time. Mhm. Yeah. Mm, I think.
Alrighty. And that's I guess the very end of the workflow is I made these alternate feet too. So I just split the mesh and created just isolated feet, and these
Yeah,
are for the posable.
because it's for this model is gonna be used as a toy, right? Later on.
Yep. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. So these are just modular feet. Okay.
Yep. Yeah, you can swap them out. They're like separate parts.
Hmm. Yeah. Thank you for showing it off. Two more questions. So what would you say is your advice for someone to trying to get a job as a 3D character artist?
Well, it's different now. It's the market is super competitive. So my advice would be when it's this competitive, I think there's a lot of pressure to be um, competent at most parts of production. So that includes hard surface. If you're a creature artist, you should know humans. Um, it's just important these days. It's highly competitive. And those people who do know how to do everything are going to get preference. So I would say be critical of your resume. The cliff notes for your portfolio are, I think, keep it short and sweet. You don't want to waste a recruiter's time with kind of repetitive work. I have a lot of dinosaurs on my portfolio. I don't need to show every single dinosaur on the front page of it. So it's I think make sure that you have a variety of things that advertise your skills. Look for gaps, and if you have gaps, try to fill them. I need to put more human characters on my portfolio. I got a chance to work on a bunch on towers, but for various reasons, I can't put them on there. So I need to fill my portfolio out with that. Those are products I have to take on. Um, if you're just solely interested in dinosaurs and creatures, having them on there will mean that you will probably get preference for that kind of work. But find ways to get excited about other things. It'll help your art if you do. I think every time I've done something I didn't want to do, and I found a way to have a good attitude about it. It's improved my dinosaur work too. You'd be surprised the lessons you learn doing a variety of things. So yeah, definitely diversify your portfolios a little bit more, and
Mhm.
really showcase your skills.
So, uh, how do you say? I mean, that's a very specific question, but um, so as a creature artist, is it also important to know how to model hard surface stuff? Because
I think in
it's something
general,
quite
yes.
different. Hmm.
Yeah, these days especially, yes. I think if you want to be hireable, because I don't. There certainly is jobs out there for people who do only organic sculpting. Um, it's just they're very specialized, and the competition is so high. You know, so if you want a foot in the door in the industry, that would just be the best I can give you for advice right now. Is make sure that you're competent in like all kinds of workflows. I don't think you need to stretch so far as being an environment artist, you know,
Hmm.
but you should know how to do people for
Hmm.
sure. You should know how to do hard surface and like
Hmm.
costuming and clothing and stuff like that.
Hmm.
I think those are kind of important things to know if you want to be a character artist in this industry, because like the pure creature artist jobs, uh, they're very hard to come by.
Mm. Yeah. All right. Thanks for the advice. Um,
Yeah, we're hoping it'll get better. GTA will come out. There'll be lots of interest in the industry, and people will start putting money in, and jobs will explode. But
oh yeah.
yeah, the post COVID kind of crash of the gaming industry has been pretty hard for a lot of artists. So yeah, that's the best I could do for you is sharpen your skills, round out your portfolio, and keep applying. You'll get there.
Hmm. Hmm. Yeah. I got one more. So I've been looking at your portfolio on ArtStation, I believe,
Hmm.
and you have some work on Saurian. And you've done some animation, basically. That's my point.
Yeah.
So, what would you say? What is your general advice for someone trying to learn 3D animation?
I don't have great advice, because the way I learned was I had very talented animators I worked with on projects that were gracious enough to lend me their knowledge. Um, Brian Phillips, who worked on Saurian and has worked on the Isle, helped me kind of get my foot in the door on animation. And then Jarrell, who is a manager and animator on the Isle, and is a trained animator, also helped a lot. So I had people kind of just like tell me fundamentals. There is good news, which is that I learned on 3ds Max. The principles you learn in 3ds Max, in any animation software, will apply everywhere. You always use curves. Rigs work similar. Depending on the rigging artist. So once you learn like the fundamentals of animation, you can take it to any program you want. Blender, Maya, 3ds Max. I'm sure Cinema 4D works the same way. The only animation program I worked in that doesn't work traditionally is like Cascadeur, which is very experimental, kind of like AI-driven animation. But yeah, that's kind of the good news, is that like there is a lot to learn technically about animation, but it transfers pretty well. Um, Outside of my sort of tutelage from my coworkers, I've learned on YouTube, Udemy, Skillshare. I pick up, like, habitually. I pick up tutorials.
Hmm.
I just, if I see something and it's on sale and it's like animate, beautiful idle animations, and
Uh-huh.
I'm like, hell yeah, I want to do that. So yeah, I mean, if you've got like $15 to spare, just I
Hmm.
think kind of prowl Udemy and stuff like that. You can get some good information there. There's also just tons of great free tutorials on YouTube,
Hmm.
and I don't think they're very hard to find.
Hmm.
So yeah, that'd be my advice. Don't stop at one. If you're working in like a new field, I try to kind of watch multiple tutorials and average the advice.
Hmm.
Sometimes you can get bad information from one tutorial, so it's always good to kind of diversify your information sources when doing online tutorial and learning on your own.
Yeah, yeah. But the hardest part, as you said in the beginning, is probably gonna be starting out.
Yeah, that's and any new skill, that's true. So if you wanted to program, if you wanted to animate, if you wanted to get into hard surface sculpting, it's way more daunting in the beginning than when you start doing it. And the unfortunate thing is the only way to get better is to start, and it won't be good when you start. But I would say find reasonable projects to begin. If you're getting into hard surface, don't make a super elaborate mech. It might be your interest, but like start with a soda can. Begin simple, build out, and you'll get there. There's no such thing as mystical knowledge. You can learn anything you
Oh,
want to. So yeah, it's just beginning. It's start if you don't want to start today, tomorrow's a good time too. you know
yeah, that's true. Yeah. Yeah, but I could relate so much to just uh, whenever I start. Well, I think I've started in Blender or whatever program that was sculpting. I wanted to make like some crazy detailed monster as the first thing
Yep.
ever. I think many of us are guilty of this, just jumping into something super
Yeah.
advanced right in the beginning.
Your ambition often exceeds your skill level.
Exactly.
And it's so, because I've worked in game dev for 10 years now, and it's so funny because all the projects that I work on, Saurian was a huge, like, it's 10 years on Saurian, 10 years on the Isle. It was 5 years on Towers. Like, they're all these, like, massive scoped games, and now I, like, yearn for, like, a, 2-month mobile game. Like, I see people I know work on game jams where they finish a game in 3 weeks, and I'm
Oh yeah.
like, man, I just want to do something stupid simple because I can't handle these huge projects anymore. So yeah, I think kind of going back to the theme of keeping yourself disciplined is don't put yourself in positions to fail. If you want to get into a new skill, don't set the bar so high for yourself.
Mm.
Make a good pistol before you make a good tank. Like, take your time.
Mm. Yeah, thank you so much. I love the ending point, but it's not the end of the interview because now it's time for the rapid fire
Alrighty.
challenge. So I'll explain it really quick for those who don't know. Now Jacob will sculpt a dinosaur in 10 minutes while answering different questions, short ones. All
I'm
right.
very scared about this, by the way.
Okay, so now it's category origins and background. What got you into paleo art?
Drawing since I was a child. I think for a lot of people that's true.
Yeah, a lot can relate to that. What was your biggest artistic inspiration growing up?
Todd Marshall.
Todd Marshall. I don't think I
If you
know
don't know who
this.
that is, do you know who that is?
No. I will
I'm gonna feel
Google him.
really old if you don't.
Maybe I just know his art, but I don't know the name.
Yeah, he had some really edgy paleo art back in the day, which was really cool.
Mm-hmm. Did you start with? Oh yeah, did you start with drawing or sculpting? But I think it's drawing, right?
Drawing, yeah,
Mm-hmm.
yeah, sketching.
What was your first 3D program you've used?
Blender.
Blender. Do you remember the first prehistoric animal you've ever drew?
I think it was a sauropod. I wouldn't know which.
Oh, you still remember? For me, it's no clue actually. Did documentary films influence you?
Yes, Walking with Dinosaurs definitely did, and all of those old ones. I mean, what Jurassic Fight Club and stuff like that. Absolutely, every time those came on, it was an event for me.
Yeah. Were you a dinosaur obsessed kid?
Yes, very much.
Now it's category paleo passion. What's your favorite prehistoric animal?
Whatever I worked on last, so T-Rex.
Most underrated prehistoric species.
Ichthyosaurs.
Mm-hmm. Which extinct animal would be the scariest in real life?
Who's scariest in real life? Utahraptor.
Mm-hmm. Favorite dinosaur group?
Probably theropods, but I'm non-committal.
Yeah, but I think theropods is gonna be for a lot of people.
Yeah.
Oh, which extinct animal would be the cutest?
I like Psittacosaurus. It's pretty cute.
Oh, the taco.
Yeah, taco.
Feathered or scaly, more fun to sculpt?
Scaly. The feathered is fun.
Mm-hmm. What feature is easiest to get wrong?
The feet
Mm-hmm.
or the hands, interchangeable.
Mm-hmm. Most challenging animal to design accurately?
I had a lot of trouble with the Saurian Champtosaurus, oddly enough.
Ooh, all right, interesting. Okay, this is interesting. What fossil discovery excited you most? If you have such
Oh man,
situation.
there's so many. We were pretty excited about Dakota Raptor, which then we soured on pretty quickly.
Mhm.
But I always like soft tissue impressions. I
Mhm.
had the wonderful chance to work on the impressions for the redescription of the impressions for Carnotaurus, and that excited me quite a lot because
Oh.
Carno is one of my favorite dinosaurs.
No, I think I remember that art of yours. Now it's research and accuracy. How deep do you dive into scientific papers?
Somewhat deep. They're very dry reading material.
Mhm.
It's important to be able to read them, but
Mhm.
yeah, I only somewhat deep.
Mhm. Yeah, it can have that scientific jargon that can be,
Yeah.
a turn off for many people.
I like to,
Mhm.
if I'm unsure about a discovery, I like to read through them if I
Mhm.
can and try to interpret it.
Favorite reference resource?
Skeletal drawings by Scott Hartman. Resource? Are you talking like a website? Because I don't know. If I find stuff on Google.
Yeah. Do you consult with paleontologists often?
Not as often as I want, but I've had a chance to do it a few times.
Do you ever get lost in research?
Yes.
Biggest paleo debate you enjoy?
I don't enjoy paleo debates anymore.
Not anymore, but you used to.
Not anymore. I used to love them. I used to really like people who were really angry about lips on Tyrannosaurus.
Okay. Soft tissue reconstructions, love or hate?
Love.
Uh, are paleo reconstructions more science or art?
I don't think they're mutually exclusive. They're both.
Arts and design process. ZBrush or Blender?
Depends on what I'm working on.
Favorite sculpting brush?
The move tool.
Do you reference modern animals often?
Yes.
How long does an average model take to finish?
2 weeks to a month for like a really detailed one.
Do you texture your own models?
Yep.
Hardest part of texturing?
When you get past like the kind of block out of the colors, doing all that like nuanced stuff can be very difficult. It takes a lot of time.
Okay, and now it's anatomy and form. Hardest anatomical challenge for you to sculpt?
Probably hands and feet.
Mm-hmm. Oh, what's easier, fur, scales, or feathers?
Well, they all got their challenges.
Mm-hmm.
Fur's the hardest for me. Probably scales. I think scales are probably easiest. I have good workflows for those.
Mm-hmm. Do you exaggerate proportions slightly or keep strict realism?
I keep strict realism if it's a serious paleo piece.
Mm-hmm. Most fun animal trait to capture?
Most fun animal trait to capture. The eyes.
Mm-hmm. Creature design beyond paleo art. Do you enjoy fictional creatures as much as real ones?
Maybe not as much, but I enjoy them quite a bit.
Mm-hmm. Favorite fictional creature design?
Maybe anything from Avatar or probably the Xenomorph, the Alien Queen.
Oh yeah, that's a good
Very
one.
cool one.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Sci-fi or fantasy? Which appeals to you more?
Sci-fi probably.
Mm-hmm. Do you like hybrid creatures?
Like the ones from Jurassic World? No.
Okay, now it's tools and technical. Preferred rendering software.
Blender maybe. I like Marmoset a lot too.
Mm-hmm. Hardest technical challenge you've solved.
Definitely lots of the furry creatures I had to do for towers. And just any of we did like a bunch of procedural creatures, which were quite a lot of work.
That's interesting. Do you retopologize manually?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Not when I'm sculpting though. I use ZRemesher when I'm sculpting often.
Mm-hmm. Substance Painter or another tool for texturing?
I use Substance Painter. I would like to use Blender. I've seen that has some pretty cool painting tools now.
Yeah, it's decent, but I think that Substance is still better in my opinion.
Yeah.
How many reference images per project?
Dozens. Oh, there goes my timer.
Yeah, there we go. For me, it should be any time now because I had some slight delay for some reason. Oh, there we go. All right.
That didn't do too bad.
Yeah, I think that's great, honestly, for 10 minutes. Then.
Not too bad for a 10-minute sculpt.
Thank you so much for being here and
yeah, thanks for having me
and agreeing to be a part of this podcast. I really appreciate it, honestly.
Thank you for asking me. It was a lot of fun.
Yeah. I really appreciate the tips that you shared for sculpting scales. Once again, yeah. Thanks again to the viewers. Thank you for watching, and I will see you in the next episode. See ya. Bye.
See ya.